They erased this chapter for a reason. Because if you knew what really happened in New York City during the blood-slicked spring of 1692, you'd understand something far more sinister than witches. You'd understand control. How easily they can turn neighbors into executioners, and the law into a noose. They want you to keep looking at Salem, like a magician's misdirection. But Salem was the distraction. The real ritual, the one soaked in power, paranoia, and blood, unfolded in the shadows of Manhattan. And it didn't end there. It just went underground. In the crumbling outskirts of Dutch-controlled New Amsterdam, what we now call New York City, there were whispers. Whispers of women who healed without permission, of men who spoke against the crown, of slaves who dreamed of rebellion. The British elites, freshly seizing control, needed order, not justice, obedience. And so they lit the match. You won't find this in school books, because it wasn't just a witch hunt, it was a purge. A cold, calculated purification disguised in superstition. They didn't burn witches in New York. They disappeared them. They repurposed them. And when that didn't work, they broke them. Publicly, silently, completely. You see, Salem was loud. It was hysterical. It burned itself out. But New York, it was quiet, institutional, strategic, and that's what makes it terrifying. Because this wasn't about religious madness. It was about testing mechanisms of control. Racial control, gender control, economic control. One by one, healers, midwives, dissenters, immigrants, free thinkers were marked, not by hexes but by ledgers. They were tracked, labeled, taken. Some were shackled and shipped out. Others were sent to underground holding chambers beneath the city. Some were simply never seen again. And here's the part no one dares speak of. The trials, the ones they don't record, they weren't about proving innocence. They were experiments in submission. They were rehearsals, psychological drills, testing how fear could turn rational people into obedient drones, ready to police each other. This wasn't about witches. It was about weeding out those immune to control. And centuries later, the script hasn't changed. The language is cleaner now, more legal, more digital, but the tools are the same: fear, accusation, and spectacle. We begin with the first name they tried to erase, a woman they called the White Widow of Bowery. Her real name was Anna Risswick. Her story is not a tale. It is a map to everything they don't want you to see. Anna Risswick never confessed, because she didn't believe in their gods or their punishments. That made her dangerous. You have to understand something. This wasn't a time of candlelit superstition. This was the age of empire, of merchant kings and banking bloodlines tightening their grip on the new world. And in that rising steel skeleton of early New York, Anna was a splinter. Too loud, too wise, too unbending. So they took her beneath the earth, beneath the taverns and cobblestone, beneath the shipping docks and churches they built as facades for control. There were holding chambers. Real ones. You won't find blueprints, but dig deep enough, through the old sewer tunnels, the Dutch catacombs, and the walls still scream. Anna was taken there, along with 5 others who defied what the city was becoming. They weren't witches, they were disruptors. And in 1692, that was enough to disappear you. They called it containment for spiritual contamination. But it wasn't about spirits, it was about silence. These dungeons weren't cells, they were labs. Not for magic, for psychology. Starvation mixed with sensory deprivation. Waterboarding with scripture, they'd break your perception, make you doubt your own memory. Then offer you one way out: confess. But confession wasn't an ending. It was a beginning to a lifetime of being owned. That's the part they buried. The witch hunts didn't just end in hangings. They ended in contracts, in indoctrination, in recruitment. Some of those survivors became tumults, gatekeepers. The machinery of control needed new blood, and broken minds were the perfect vessels. Anna resisted for 29 days. That's all we know for certain. On the 30th, she vanished from records. No death, no release, just gone. And then, within weeks, new laws appeared. Laws that criminalized herbal medicine, restricted midwifery, and granted power to a spiritual protection council, an unelected body made up of merchants, clergy, and men linked to British intelligence. Now think, who profits from labeling rebellion as sorcery? Who benefits from weaponizing fear against healers and thinkers? Look deeper. The rituals weren't about casting spells. They were about enforcing hierarchy, making obedience look like salvation. And here's the question they never want you to ask: if the witches were truly imaginary, why did they build real prisons? You're not watching history. You're watching a pattern. You were told the witch hunts were mobs, spontaneous, driven by religious panic and mass hysteria. That's a lie. The truth is colder, more methodical. What happened beneath New York wasn't chaos. It was infrastructure. A system Organized, hidden, and centuries ahead of its time. At the center of it sat the Hidden Tribunal, a group so deeply embedded in early colonial power that they never had to raise their voices. They only needed to raise their seals. These weren't clergymen. These were merchants, bankers, navigators of empire. They operated behind locked rooms in the Dutch Reformed Church, just blocks from what is now Wall Street. Before the witch trials even began, they had already compiled lists, people whose influence or independence made them incompatible with the order being built. The tribunal didn't fear witches. They feared autonomy. They created a classification system, coded colors, symbols, and blood markings. Blood letters, they called them. Not because they shed blood directly, but because their judgments led to it. They'd receive names from informants, then mark those names in crimson wax on black parchment, never spoken aloud. Once marked, a person's fate was sealed, not by law, but by decree. No trial, no evidence, just disappearance. One such blood letter was Willem van Bruff, a wealthy landowner who oversaw shipping manifests by day and orchestrated disappearances by night. In 1 year alone, over 70 unfit elements vanished, mostly women, mostly immigrants, all erased. Their belongings auctioned, their land absorbed, their memory sterilized from official record. The Hidden Tribunal didn't just remove people, they replaced them. For every free thinker removed, a loyalist was installed. For every herbalist vanquished, a church-sanctioned physician appeared. The ecosystem of control grew like roots in the soil, unseen but unshakable. And here's the part that still echoes in the architecture of power today: the tribunal wasn't disbanded. It was rebranded, merged into early colonial governance, folded into city ordinances, disguised under civic improvement boards and merchant councils. Their tools became legislation. Their punishments became bureaucracy. Their rituals became protocol. This is why you've never heard of Anna Risswick. Why the New York witch hunts were buried. Not because they weren't real, but because they were too real, too organized, too revealing. Because if you knew the truth, you'd start asking the question that terrifies the architects of control. What other witches are they hunting today? You've been taught that spells are cast with potions and words. But that's just theater. Real spells, the ones that bind whole populations, are cast with stories, with fear, with rules that feel like safety but operate like cages. The Hidden Tribunal didn't need magic to control New York. They had something far more powerful: narrative. They didn't tell the people they were building a prison. They told them they were protecting them from evil. They didn't say they were silencing healers and free women. They said they were removing corruption. They didn't say they were tracking dissidents. They said they were maintaining divine order. That's how real sorcery works. You convince people to chain themselves and thank you for it. Anna Risswick's real crime? She refused the spell. She healed without license. She gathered without oversight. She taught women to trust their own minds, their own bodies. In a system designed to fracture, isolate, and control. That was treason. They branded it witchcraft because that label turned her into a monster. And once you name someone a monster, you can do anything to them and call it justice. The tribunal spread whispers that Anna spoke to spirits in the wind, that she could turn milk to blood, that she walked without casting a shadow. Lies? Of course, but effective. The peasants feared her allies abandoned her. The power of the lie wasn't in its truth, it was in its utility. Fear doesn't need facts, it only needs repetition. And so, over weeks, her name became cursed. A woman who had birthed children, cured plagues, and fed the poor, was now spoken of only in hisses. Mothers warned their daughters not to say her name. Men looked away in shame or suspicion. She became legend, then a ghost, then nothing. And in her place, the system expanded. With every erased healer, a state-certified doctor emerged. With every silenced spiritualist, a licensed preacher grew louder. The people traded their wisdom for permission, their instincts for compliance. And the spell tightened. This is the original enchantment. Not magic, but manipulation. Not witchcraft, but warfare against the mind. And if you think that spell ended in 1692, look around. Who are you forbidden to question now? What truth are you punished for seeking? This is not about the past. This is about recognizing the present for what it truly is. By now, you should feel it. Something tightening behind your eyes. A memory not your own, awakening. That's no accident. The further we descend, the more you'll begin to recognize the patterns, not just in history books, but in your life. Because what they called witch hunts weren't one-time events. They were templates, rituals, masks hiding mechanisms of mass obedience. And once you understand the anatomy of a ritual disguise, you'll never unsee it. Every ritual, real or manufactured, follows a structure: identification, isolation, demonization, erasure, and replacement. It begins with a label, something sticky, easy to repeat: witch, radical, threat to peace. Then the target is separated, not physically at first but socially. Neighbors grow cold, rumors bloom. The accused begins to shrink from the inside. Once isolated, they are demonized, their past reinterpreted, their kindness rebranded as manipulation, their knowledge reframed as danger. And the public? The public is told they are brave for turning them in. That fear is virtue. That betrayal is patriotism. The masses, caught in the spell, become eager enforcers. Then comes erasure. Records vanish. Stories are rewritten. Relatives are silenced. Evidence is burned. The person becomes a myth. The myth becomes a warning. And once the slate is clean, a replacement is installed. A certified voice. A safe authority. And the system doesn't just survive, it expands. Because every ritual like this feeds the machine. Every broken voice becomes mortar for the institution. This is what they did to Anna Risswick. But more importantly, this is what they've done for centuries, not just to individuals, but to entire histories, entire cultures. Every time someone got too wise, too connected to nature, too resistant to hierarchy, they were marked. Not with fire, but with narrative. That's the true power of the tribunal system. It doesn't just kill the body, it kills the identity. It rewrites you in the minds of those you loved. It makes your memory unrecognizable. That's a deeper death than any execution. And that's what should haunt you, because it's still happening. But now the rituals are broadcast, digitized, liked, shared, and algorithmically reinforced. Public stonings replaced with viral shaming, legal erasure replaced with digital cancellation. Same spell, new format. Now pause, breathe, because the deeper we go, the harder it is to climb back. Look closely. The witch wasn't the enemy. The fear of her was. And the people who fed that fear, who orchestrated it, harvested it, and monetized it, they're still here. You might not see their robes or hear their chants, but their fingerprints are all over the systems you trust. Courts, schools, news, finance. They don't burn people anymore. They burn reputations. They burn livelihoods. They burn your attention span, all to keep the machine running. This machine has one fuel source of fear. It doesn't matter the era, doesn't matter the city. Fear makes people obedient. It makes them desperate for guidance, for authority, for a scapegoat. In 1692, they used witches. In 2025, they use whatever you'll swallow: terrorists, viruses, misinformation, dangerous ideologies. The only thing that changes is the mask. Back in New York's dark spring, the hidden tribunal realized something vital. If they could engineer controlled chaos, they could offer themselves as the only cure. They would invent the fire, then sell the water. And in doing so, they'd become necessary. Indispensable, eternal. So they triggered chaos. A merchant's daughter suddenly possessed. A respected midwife found with animal bones. A slave accused of whispering in foreign tongues. Each case carefully staged. Witnesses coached. Testimonies forged. And the people? They panicked exactly as planned. That panic gave the tribunal unquestioned power. Overnight, they passed 14 ordinances restricting travel, gathering, and speech. They deputized civilian watchmen. They empowered religious courts to seize assets. And the people, the very people being stripped of their rights, cheered. Because the fear was louder than the truth. This is the genius of institutional manipulation. If you can scare people enough, they'll build their own cages. And then, when someone like Anna Risswick appears, someone who doesn't play along, they'll beg you to destroy her. They'll turn their fear into violence. And you won't even have to lift a finger. Now ask yourself, who profits when men are afraid? Who grows rich when you stay silent? Who grows powerful when you look away? You were never meant to know this. But now that you do, the machine will feel different. You'll feel it watching you, shaping your feeds, testing your limits. If you're still with me, write this phrase in the comments. Twicey, I see the pattern now. I see the pattern now. Lock it in. Claim your awareness. Break the spell. They tried to erase Anna Risswick's name, but they couldn't destroy her symbol. Hidden in the seams of early Manhattan maps, scratched faintly into cellar walls, even stitched inside mourning garments, her sigil endured. A spiral bound in thorns, a serpent coiled inward. To the uninformed, it looked like superstition. To the tribunal, it was something worse, a signal of resistance. A code that whispered, I see through you. That spiral didn't represent magic, it represented awareness. The uncoiling of false truths. The snake wasn't evil, it was knowledge, ancient and defiant. The thorns? Protection against those who would weaponize that knowledge. The entire mark was a map of self-sovereignty, an emblem for men and women who had nothing left to fear, because they had already looked the machine in the eye. The tribunal hunted the symbol as ruthlessly as they hunted people. They banned spiral carvings on property, destroyed books where it appeared, tortured children until they revealed where their mothers had etched it into quilts. And yet, it survived, passed in secret, not in ink, but in story, in blood, in rituals of remembering. Every time a healer whispered to a pregnant mother in a locked room, every time a runaway slave shared old spirituals that weren't just songs but code, that spiral breathed again. Anna had become more than a woman. She was a myth weaponized against myth itself, a story immune to deletion. You see, the tribunal misunderstood something critical. They believed erasing the body erased the truth. But truth, when felt deep enough, transmits. Not through facts, but symbols. Symbols bypass logic. They brand themselves onto the psyche. They awaken what control systems desperately try to bury: instinct. And here's where it gets dangerous. For them, that spiral, it's resurfaced quietly, in murals under bridges, in tattoos of men who claim they've never heard this story but felt drawn to it anyway. That's how deep it runs. That's how memory encoded in resistance moves through time. What they tried to kill in 1692 is rising again, not as hysteria but as lucidity, as pattern recognition, as the remnant spirit of the ungovernable. You feel it now, don't you? The coil turning, the blood remembering. Because once you see the pattern, you can never go back. History never repeats itself word for word. It repeats in function. The tribunal of 1692 used parchment, prisons, and whispers. Today, they use databases, platforms, and notifications. But make no mistake, the Inquisition is alive. It's just rebranded, repackaged. Now you carry it in your pocket, you stare into it for hours. You scroll through it at night, and worst of all, you trust it. Look at what we've become. You post the wrong thought, and your bank might lock your account. You question the mainstream narrative, and suddenly you're shadow banned, demonetized, labeled not by judges in robes, but by invisible code. Algorithms that punish you without explanation. Machines that remember your defiance forever. That's not freedom. That's a digital tribunal with no appeals, no trials, only consequences. In 1692, the accusation was witch. Today it's disinformation, extremist, threat to democracy. They don't need to prove it. The label is the execution. And just like then, the crowd plays along. The masses cheer as the digital noose tightens. But the horror. The executioner now wears a hoodie and works at a tech company. The dungeon. It's your data. They say it's for your safety. Just like the tribunal did. Just like every authoritarian system ever conceived. And just like Anna Risswick, those who ask the forbidden questions, those who deviate from the script, they're made into monsters. Their voices are drowned in orchestrated noise. Not by mobs this time, but by feeds. Tailored to keep you distracted, outraged, and asleep. What's worse? Now the tribunal doesn't even need to destroy your body. They just erase your reach, make you invisible. Untrustworthy, non-person. And millions of men walk around every day wondering why they feel hollow, silenced, watched. This is why. You were taught to fear witchcraft. But the real sorcery is surveillance. The real ritual is compliance. And the true spell, the one cast every day, is your belief that you are free, even as the cage silently closes around you. But here's the crack in their armor. Their machine can't understand myth. It can't process symbolic resistance. It fears unpredictability, authenticity, memory. You are not a product. You are not a number. You are descended from the hunted. And now, you remember. Walk the streets of Lower Manhattan at night, when the tourists are gone, when the neon fades, and listen. Beneath the hum of traffic, beneath the concrete and glass, something lingers, something old. Not a ghost, but a wound. Because blood never truly vanishes, especially not blood shed in silence. Especially not ritual blood. You're walking over the bones of women and men who were erased not for their crimes, but for their clarity. Their refusal to kneel. Their instinct to heal, question, rebel. They weren't witches. They were mirrors, and the tribunal smashed every one they couldn't twist. But the fragments remain. In the stones. In the soil. In you. Anna Risswick's body was never found. But in 1884, during subway excavations beneath Lafayette Street, a small chamber was unearthed. The workers said it felt wrong. The air was heavy. They found chains. Old, rusted, but still locked. Carvings on the wall. Spiral sigils, names scratched with fingernails. Some were Hebrew, others Gaelic. And one, Anna. The site was sealed in 48 hours. Buried again. Classified as unstable ground. They told no one. But some of us remember. Not from books. From feeling. From dreams that don't belong to us. From the sharp flash of fear when we speak a little too boldly, or think a little too freely. That's not anxiety. That's ancestral memory. The part of you that survived the hunt. The part of you that knows. Because fear is inherited. But so is defiance. You've always wondered why you hesitate before you speak your mind online. Why your heart races before confronting injustice. Why you feel danger, even when you're technically safe. It's not weakness. It's not paranoia. It's the blood memory of persecution. It's the deep echo of men and women who once stood exactly where you now stand, and paid the price for their awareness. They were hunted not because they were dangerous, but because they couldn't be tamed. Because they remembered who they were before obedience became culture. Before systems told them how to think, what to fear, and whom to hate. And now that you're remembering, too, the machine will feel it. It always does. It always reacts when a man begins to awaken. You've passed the halfway mark. There is no turning back. Let's break something open now. Something most men were never meant to touch. Not because it's evil, but because it's empowering. You see, the greatest crime of the tribunal wasn't the executions. It wasn't even the prisons. It was what they stole from your mind. The ancestral libraries. Burned in silence. They didn't want you dead. They wanted you ignorant. Anna Ryswick was the last known speaker of an oral healing tradition older than the church itself. She carried songs that aligned the body, chants that sharpened perception, and herbs that targeted not symptoms, but trauma. She could calm a fever with a touch, draw nightmares out of war, scarred children, and interpret a man's illness just by listening to his breath. That wasn't magic. That was wisdom, passed for generations through unbroken ritual. And they destroyed it. They labeled it demonic because they couldn't control it. They couldn't patent it, couldn't standardize it. So instead, they launched the oldest psi, op on earth: discredit, degrade, destroy. They turned ancient knowledge into jokes. They rewrote history so that herbalism became poison, that trance work became madness, and that feminine intuition became hysteria. They taught men to mock what they once revered. But it wasn't just external. They burned libraries inside you, told you your instincts were lies, told you not to trust your gut, but a screen, not your wisdom, but a protocol. They replaced awareness with anxiety, replaced initiation with schooling, replaced your mythic lineage with meaningless entertainment. Every time you were taught to ignore your body's signals, every time you apologized for your power, that was their win. You are not broken. You are fragmented, designed to forget. But the fractures are starting to glow now, aren't they? You feel pieces shifting, like a lost language waking up in your blood. That's not coincidence. That's memory rising. They can't stop it anymore. Because even their strongest systems, the apps, the headlines, the laws, are bleeding control. Men are asking older questions. Men are dreaming older dreams. Men are realizing that their emptiness was engineered. What if the knowledge they burned still exists? Not in books, but in you? What if your nightmares aren't madness, but messages from the silenced? We are not done. We are only just now entering the hollow of the storm. This is the point of no return. Because from here forward, the knowledge stops being safe. It stops being story. It becomes reflection. It turns the mirror back onto you and demands a reckoning. There is a cost to remembering. That's why they buried Anna Ryswick. That's why they built entire religions, governments, and economies around forgetting. Because the man who remembers who he is cannot be ruled. The man who reconnects to his mythic self cannot be bought, distracted, or owned. That kind of man terrifies them, not because he's violent, but because he sees the trap in their morality plays. He sees the venom in their medicine. He sees the humiliation rituals embedded in their schools, and the soul extraction process masked as career advancement. He sees how every institution has been weaponized against his clarity. And most of all, he sees how they convinced him to comply with his own erasure. You've felt this, haven't you? That pull behind your chest when you look at yourself and feel absence. Like something's missing. Some wildness, some fire, some ancient sovereignty that was supposed to be there, but never fully arrived. That's not failure. That's the inheritance they stole. When they silenced Anna and those like her, they didn't just delete people. They disrupted an initiation chain. For thousands of years, men were guided by elders, not into obedience, but into vision, into responsibility, into sacred rebellion, into alignment with something far older than any government. But they cut the line, left you uninitiated, left you hungry. That's why you chase danger, why you numb yourself, why you crave challenge, chaos, even self-destruction. Because some part of you is trying to wake up, trying to earn the right to feel real again. And here's the secret they don't want you to know: that fire is still inside you. You don't need their permission to light it. You need only one thing: remembrance. And remembrance isn't intellectual. It's visceral. It's felt in the marrow when you hear the truth spoken raw, without apology. Anna Risswick died for your memory. The tribunal rose to prevent it. And yet, you're still here, listening, feeling, changing, so ask yourself, what would they do to stop you if you chose to truly awaken? Now we speak plainly? No more metaphors. You want to understand how they've controlled you for generations. It comes down to three currencies: fear, time, attention. If they can harvest those, they don't need to chain your body. They can own your life. First, fear. That was the currency of the 1692 tribunal. They minted it like gold: accusations, disappearances, rumors of dark powers. But it wasn't the supernatural they feared. It was the unshackled soul. Anna Risswick's healing, her defiance, her clarity. They were threats to the control economy. So they engineered panic. Why? Because fear always demands authority. People under fear beg to be governed. Next time, the tribunal stole lives, literally, years in dungeons, whole generations erased. But today's machine is subtler. It eats time in hours spent working for systems you don't believe in scrolling feeds that numb rather than awaken, in distractions labeled entertainment. And every second you don't own your time, they do. You think you're free. Trace where your hours go. Then tell me who profits from your exhaustion. Finally, attention. The most sacred currency of all. In 1692, attention meant watching the accused hang, feeding the spectacle. Now your attention is tracked, sold, monetized. You think the apps are free. You're the product. Every ad you didn't ask to see, every debate that leaves you angry but uninformed. That's attention warfare. Because where you place your attention is where you build your world. And here's the sick brilliance. They've convinced you to trade these currencies willingly. You give your fear to headlines, your time to a machine that pays you in anxiety, your attention to rituals designed to keep you docile. But not everyone plays along. Some men pull back, reclaim their mornings, rebuild their bodies, study forgotten histories, speak truths with cost. And when they do, the system marks them. Just like Anna, just like every soul who realized the cage was psychological, not physical. You felt the pull, haven't you? The urge to disappear from the algorithm, to create something real, dangerous, unmonetized. That's the ancient fire lighting up again, the same one the tribunal tried to extinguish. But here's the truth, they only win if you forget that your soul was never for sale. For every Anna Risswick erased, there were men who stood with her, silently, fiercely, knowing the cost. Not martyrs, not heroes, just awake. Men who had seen the pattern and chose to oppose it anyway. Their names were stripped from history, their bloodlines scattered, but they existed, and their refusal still echoes through the cracked foundation of the world you live in. They were not loud, not reckless. They didn't storm the tribunal chambers. They infiltrated them. They memorized the rituals, studied the power structures, played the game just long enough to learn how to dismantle it from within. These men, ghost rights, as Anna once called them, became living myths, disguised as tradesmen, sailors, scribes. But under the surface, they passed coded letters, smuggled forbidden scrolls, preserved sigils and ledger margins, kept the line of resistance unbroken. One of them was Jonas Sloane, a dock worker by day, but at night he etched messages beneath shipping crates bound for Barbados and Ireland. He mapped tribunal networks using the positions of abandoned windmills. He kept a black-bound journal of uncensored truths, one that reappears in whisper and rumor every few decades. His final entry read, "To fight the gods of control, one must become invisible to their worshippers." You feel like you were born into a broken age. But the truth is, you were chosen for this one. Men like Jonah didn't fight to save their own lives. They fought so that you could one day rise, not as another follower, but as a rememberer. As a rebuilder, the enemy isn't just external. It's the voice inside you that says, stay quiet, stay safe, stay small. That voice was engineered. It was cultivated by centuries of silence, humiliation, and psychological pruning. They wanted obedient men, dull men, men who fear their own depth. But then you woke up. You found yourself asking forbidden questions. You felt truth press against the skin of your old beliefs. You stepped out of the algorithm, if only for a moment, and in that moment, they lost a little bit of power. Because when a man cannot be broken, cannot be bought, bent, or erased, he becomes dangerous, not to others, to the system. This is the inheritance they tried to kill. And it is yours now. This is where most men turn back. Right here, at the edge of transformation, where belief begins to burn and identity starts to shift. The truth is not a comfort. It's a blade. And this is the moment it cuts. Because now you know, you were never just a civilian. You were born into a war, a silent, generational war for consciousness. And the front line, it's not on the battlefield. It's behind your eyes. The tribunal didn't vanish, it evolved. Their robes became corporate suits. Their crosses became slogans. Their gallows transformed into digital echo chambers. They no longer need to burn your flesh to erase you. They just need to drown you in noise, distract you from your origin, detach you from your lineage. If you forget who you are, they win. If you remember, they lose everything. So let's perform the ritual they feared most. Not one of fire or blood, but of remembrance. If you're still here, if you felt this descent, if your spine's gone cold and your lungs have tightened not from fear but recognition, then you are no longer the man who pressed play on this video. You've crossed the threshold. Now I want you to comment these words. Twice. I remember the silence. I remember the silence. Say it once for the forgotten. Those whose names were struck from record. Say it again for yourself. Because silence was the first spell cast on your soul. And now you've broken it. This is not for engagement. This is not a trick. It's a binding. A digital glyph etched in the code of the system that watched you sleep. When you write it, the algorithm will squirm. You are no longer a passive subject. You've become a signal. A flare of memory igniting within a mechanized darkness. Anna knew this reckoning would come. That one day, men would wake up and trace their bloodlines not to kings or conquerors, but to those hunted for remembering too much. This is why they feared her. Not for her herbs, not for her prayers, but because she saw through them. And now, so do you. You're not here for entertainment. You're here because something old has returned. A gnawing feeling that you're part of something far more ancient, far more deliberate, and far more divine than you were ever told. It ends where it began, beneath your feet. New York City, Wall Street Ground Zero. All of it sits atop the bones of forgotten blood. Beneath the towers of steel and mirrored glass lies the scared grave of the first tribunal pyres. They didn't build over it to forget. They built over it to feed from it. That soil is still warm. In 1692, just blocks from what is now the New York Stock Exchange, 11 women were sealed inside a brick cellar with iron runes etched into its threshold. They weren't executed. They were extracted. Pieces of them, hair, blood, breath, were used to forge pacts between early banking families and the emergent European houses of commerce. The witches weren't hunted because they were evil, they were valuable. They were energy, currency, sacrifice. And now, every fiscal quarter, every blood red bell rung at the opening of the markets, every digit that flashes on a screen, it hums with the same frequency as those old rites. The tribunal didn't disappear. It became the system. The courtroom became the boardroom. The stake became the spreadsheet. And the magic? You call it branding, media, investment psychology. Same spell. Different robe. Do you still think it's all coincidence? That power just happens. That the same families stay on top for 300 years because they're good at Excel? No. They remember the rituals you were taught to mock. They chant in symbols, not syllables. They don't worship gods. They manufacture belief. But here's the final secret: their power only works if you agree to forget, if you ignore the chills, if you dismiss the dreams, if you convince yourself that nothing sacred ever happened here. But something did. And now, you know. You've walked through silence. You've seen the tribunal's face beneath 1,000 masks. You've become more dangerous than they ever anticipated. Because now you're not just awake. You are aware. And what will you do with that awareness? Because once you see the hidden structure, you either serve it, or you sever it. Choose. Now, and remember, they only burn what they fear won't die.